Hi, I'm Mark Brumley, president of Ignatius Press, and I'm here with Edward Pentin, one of our new authors, author of the book, The Rigging of a Vatican Synod. Ed is also, many of you will know, that he's also a reporter for the National Catholic Register, and we're excited to have him here, especially to talk about this, no doubt, controversial book.
Yes.
Tell us, Ed, why did you write this book? First of all, what's the book about, and then why did you write it?
Well, the book, as you said, the title is The Rigging of Vatican Synod with a question mark.
Yes, question mark.
Because there were strong allegations of manipulation at the last synod, and I felt at the end of it that if these were true, then I think Catholics need to know about it, and there did seem a strong element of truth to this. So I thought, well, let's look into it and see what really happened. So I sort of dug deeper and found that there was quite a lot of evidence for not perhaps a deliberate manipulation, a concerted manipulation, but at the same time there was an agenda to push through. And so I thought, well, let's uncover this in the hope that it will help the next synod to be closer to the Holy Father's vision for the synod process. That was my general aim.
Okay, well, you mentioned the Holy Father's vision of the synodal process. What was that vision?
Well, the vision was, I believe, to open up the Church to all of these debates that have been going on for the last 50 years about marriage and the family, and to really just thresh these issues out and get them discussed out in the open, rather than this sort of one side being criticising the Vatican for not listening to them. Mm-hmm. So get all sides to listen to each other and then just find out where to go from there. So I think the idea was pretty good. I mean, I think everyone sort of quite welcome that, but on the other hand, if you're going to have a debate, it's got to be fair, and I think if it wasn't fair, then people need to know about that.
Well, there are all kinds of particular allegations, and we want to encourage people who are watching this video to get your book, to pursue those and look into the questions and so on. But even apart from the particulars, some people are going to say, well, this is sort of muckraking, and why are you doing this, and how is this really of service to the Church? Shouldn't we just sort of look the other way when these things happen?
Yeah, I mean, I struggled with it, whether I should write it or not. But I got a lot of comments from people I really respect in the church leaders, and they said, this needs to be told, this story needs to be told, because, it's an injustice, it's not fair, and the Church should allow both sides to be heard. And so my aim really is obviously not to muckrake, but to just bring a sense of fairness and fair play to the process for the next synod, so that everyone gets a fair hearing.
What would you say is and I know there are both, you sort of get both sides to it. You get the critics and you get the people who are being criticized, or at least who represent a perspective that's different from what the critics of the synod say. Mm-hmm. So you do give both sides of this, but what would you say is probably the overarching problem or weakness with the last synod? That if that hadn't been in play, we might not have seen all of the controversy that we saw, especially around the interim report.
I think the key aspect that kept coming up again and again as I was writing this book is the kind of disregard for scripture and tradition in the last synod, and that there was a sort of a push to sort of start this sort of, in a sense, a new church, to start with the problems and how the church should deal with the problems, rather than start with what the church teaches and then apply those things to the problems today. So I think that was perhaps what many saw as the problem with the last synod, that it was coming from the wrong area, from the wrong angle,
starting from the wrong
the point precept.
We had a discussion at the Napa Institute, and there was actually a somewhat unplanned conversation between George Weigel and Cardinal Schönborn about the upcoming synod, and Weigel, one of the points he made was, well, let's not start with the sociology, and it was one of the hopes he expressed, that the next synod would not start so much with the sociology, start from a good theological grounding. What's the family as God has intended it? And then, of course, you look at the problems of the situation. And Cardinal Schönborn wasn't opposed to that. He was trying to explain why some of the other folk took a different perspective on it. But it was kind of interesting, because it gets to this point that you're talking about. When you start with the problems, you can sometimes lose your perspective.
Yes, and I think the fact, as I put in the book, that those leading the synod were of a certain bent, you know,
Right.
regarding theology, and so that all made it skewed as well. But I think the next synod could be better because it's starting not from the problems, but they're looking at solutions. So, as we know, the Church has solutions through the teaching and Scripture and tradition. So I think that's a positive thing. I think it could be better this synod than the last one.
I had a discussion with one of the participants, I won't identify him, at the last synod, who was somewhat upset with this language that was used, which there was a kind of multi-step process, and it opened with listen, but then what's described, what's attributed to listening is really looking.
Yes.
And he kept trying to get the Synod Fathers to say, well, you don't listen by looking or look by listening. We need to get this. And what he was getting at was the old Catholic social teaching model of look, judge, and act.
Yes.
And his point was not that we shouldn't listen or we shouldn't look. His point, we should. We have to start by looking, but we have to look with sort of the mind of the Church, the eyes of the Church,
yes,
because that will help us see what the real problems are. I know there are a lot of people who would look at the Supreme Court decision in the United States as not a problem, but a solution.
Yes.
So if you look at it from a sort of non-Catholic or non-Christian perspective, you're going to look at that decision and say that's the right decision. Whereas if you're looking at it from a Catholic perspective, you're going to look at it differently.
That's true.
To what extent was that at play, at least at the last synod, where they were starting from maybe, some would say, kind of a worldly perspective?
Yes, well, I think there is something to be said for that, and I put in the book that Cardinal Baldessari, the head of the Synod of Bishops, I have found out that he doesn't really put much premium on natural law. So if you don't do that, then you're obviously going to start on the wrong sort of footing. So yeah, I think they came again from the wrong angle, and they didn't really, I think, come from a sort of authentic, I mean, this is what I've heard, I mean, I can't really judge it myself, but the sort of authentic Catholic perspective for that, that's been done in the past. Right. Yeah.
Very good. Well, Ed, we want to thank you for taking some time to talk with us here. We want to encourage people to go out and get a copy of your book, The Rigging of a Vatican Synod, and they can make up their own minds whether they regard it as rigged.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks.